EOC folks, we do have a presentation from you. Welcome as well. But welcome to the chief and the fire team. Today is January 16, 2025. We're on the record from 9:50 to 10:50. It's 9:53 right now. This work session is titled Wildfire Risk and Mitigation. It's a public work session. And we'll start with introductions of Mr. Littlefield.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Anna Brawley.
Zach Johnson.
Christopher Constant. And we also have with us
I'm Chief Schrage.
Wildfire Division Chief John Glover.
Fire project manager.
Gotta press the button. It's gotta be green.
Project manager.
Now it's on.
Wildfire manager, project manager, Stephanie Dufek.
Awesome. Thank you. And on the phone, I think we have Mr. Martinez.
Yes, Chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So just as a matter of preamble for this work session, as everybody is surely aware, the fire incident in Los Angeles County has been a devastating thing to witness, and hardly imaginable how devastating it must be to be living it, whether you are a resident who's out of a home, a government official who's trying to tangle with how to manage through that, fire professional trying to intervene. And so we as a membership, as a body, have started to receive some communications from constituencies across the municipality saying, why don't you guys do something, or you need to do something about risk in Anchorage. And for those of us who've been around long enough, we know that nothing needs to be started. This effort is ongoing and has been for a long time. There have been multi-million-dollar investments that have occurred over the last maybe 6 to 7 years using discretionary money that this body had through ARPA, as well as congressionally designated spending that we received from Senator Murkowski. And that notwithstanding all of the other investments of staff and time that we are making to ensure that if such a situation were to break out here, we are able to manage the risk as best as possible. Now, it's not valuable to hear from assembly members on this topic. And so I had spoken with Chief Schrage about the possibility of this briefing, and he communicated to me that he was already thinking about this and the possibility of preparing and briefing the administration and now the assembly and the community through us. And so I'm very glad to have this presentation. There was some conversation in advance of this meeting with the administration. They may have gone a slightly different way by having a broader panel and more information, but we just don't have the time in an hour to hear about the whole process. And so the determination was made that this meeting would be the first in probably a series, and it would be led by the fire professionals in our municipality, because I think that's who the people want to hear from first. After that, we could reach deeper into our system, hear from parks, who are part of the solution, hear from OEM, who is in charge if things start to go to hell really quickly. We have also the mayor, who has a strategic plan for public safety. And so all of those elements are likely to be briefed to us in the not too distant future. But for today, we are going to start with a briefing from the fire chief and his team about wildfire risk and mitigation. With that, Chief, you have the floor. I would note that Mr. Myers has joined us.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Chair Constant. Good morning, members of the Assembly and staff. For those who might have missed it, I'm Doug Schrage, the Fire Chief. I'm joined today by Wildfire Division Chief John Glover and Stephanie Dufek, who is our Wildland Fire Programs Manager. And I appreciate your opening remarks. The devastating fires in the vicinity of Los Angeles, as well as the recent Lahaina fire in Maui, have understandably and predictably caused a lot of concern among Anchorage residents. They have many questions about the risk of a wildfire on the Anchorage hillside and elsewhere in the municipality, as well as what we are doing to mitigate and prepare. And we appreciate the opportunity to give you this briefing. I want to be clear about the risk of a major urban interface fire in the municipality. In my opinion, this is the single most significant risk facing our community. I also want to provide reassurance that everything that can reasonably be done to prepare and mitigate is being done. We are more prepared today than we have been in many years. Yet, we remain vulnerable to significant life and property loss, and addressing this risk will involve the entire community. So I appreciate this opportunity, and without much further ado, I want to turn the floor over, with your indulgence, to Chief Glover. We have about a 15-minute presentation, and then the rest of the time will be devoted for questions. Chief Glover.
All right, do we know who's managing the slide deck? Okay, so it's on the PowerPoint here. I can do it for you guys. Got it, okay. Not sure how it works. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Jasmine,
You're back on, Chief.
I think you might want to sit right there. You can do it from up there. Jasmine has it. Chief, Jasmine has it. Okay, anyhow, welcome. You have the floor, Chief.
Thank you very much, Chair Constance. For everybody again, since my mic wasn't on, Division Chief John Glover with the Anchorage Fire Department. I'll preface with saying that I'm 3 months into this position, so happy to be a part of this organization and serve this community. A little bit about myself. 24 years of operational experience in wildland fire. With that, I've had the opportunity to work the majority of that within the state of Alaska, or at least based out of here, and was afforded the opportunity to participate in the mitigation efforts over the past 20 years on Anchorage Hillside and in this community. So I'm very, very familiar with the efforts that have gone into preparing for a wildfire event and mitigating the risk. That said, throughout my career, I've spent the last 11 years working with the Alaska Incident Management Team, deploying all over the United States, supporting large fire incidents, just like what we're seeing in LA and what we saw in Maui. And currently hold the position of Lead Operations Section Chief with the Alaska Incident Management Team. So I'm very familiar with the risks that we're facing, and have tried to do an assessment of our overall risk for the municipality through an operational lens as it relates to wildfire impact. Next slide, or I guess we're on the right slide. Thank you. So I just want to be clear that the mission of the Anchorage Fire Department as it relates to wildland fire, State of Alaska Division of Forestry has suppression jurisdiction over the land and wildland fire within the municipality. And our job is to support that any event that takes place with aggressive initial attack and provide sustainable operational firefighters at whatever their requests are past the initial engagement of a fire. But and we are prepared to do that. I'll speak to some of that today, but I just want to be clear that we have mutual aid agreements where we provide support in that role. We obviously will aggressively initial attack, and we've had significant success with that over the past 25 years. So with that said, I've taken a look at our preparedness and our vulnerabilities, and as custodians of the municipality, we've really tried to amp up over the last 3 months and evaluate how we're going to proactively engage over the season of 2025 and the best way we can prepare. With that, the vulnerabilities that we faced, I've tried to prioritize the engagement that we'll have based on life preservation, property preservation, and responder safe access for responders into our vulnerable areas. So I'll speak to some of that on the next slide. A significant concern is single egress. We have a fair amount of communities within the Anchorage municipality, all the way from Eklutna down to Girdwood and beyond, where we have one way in and one way out. That's obviously an issue for evacuees, but it's also an issue for access for emergency responders. Next slide, please. Previous to my role with the department, I've worked with Dr. Jen Smith in evac planning workshops with a number of the community council heads. Amanda Loach is part of that. And then obviously our fire department, before I was involved, had other chiefs involved with that as well. So I'm very familiar with that. I've tried to provide subject matter expertise on that. And some of those are represented here on the slides. We haven't identified all of them, but what you can see up here is Glen Alps Road. That's a significant concern. Upper Huffman to Canyon Road is further down, another challenging egress route. And then obviously we got down on the bottom end, Clark's Hill and Heights Hill. And just of note, that was treated 25 years ago and is ready for retreatment again now. Next slide, please. Eagle River and Highland. 2016, we had a 25-acre fire. It was fairly challenging to access just because it wasn't road accessible, but it was right in the heart of Eagle River Valley. But both of those roads are substantial, as well as provide, secondary access roads into smaller subdivisions and other communities as well. Next slide. Potter Valley, Stuckagon Heights. Potter Valley stands out in my mind. I was part of the 2016 response to the McHugh Creek fire, and as an Anchorage resident, it was interesting because we viewed that fire to be further away than what it actually was. And at the final perimeter of that fire, we were 1.2 miles away from the closest structure, which is significant since really what allowed operational success on that fire was the wind stopped blowing. It wasn't because we got a huge influx in resources. So the threat was very real for that incident. And then on the right-hand side, we have Campbell Airstrip Road and Stuckagon Heights, Basher community, which is a very, very vulnerable community. We're familiar with the fires that have all taken place on MLK and Piper area. Over the past 20 years, we've had 4 significant fires there. In the past 10, those have been 10 acres or more. And, one of the reasons that we've had operational success is because we had roads on 4 sides of those incidents. So significant risk in that area. Next slide. Okay, so what are we doing about it? Fuel treatments. As we've stood this office up and with the $4 million grant that we got from the U.S. Forest Service, we're taking a strategic approach to look at the vulnerabilities of Alaska or of Anchorage Municipality and where we can effectively engage mitigation strategies centered around fuels treatments. This is not an easy task to accomplish, but it's also not an easy task to coordinate. But we have worked directly with Parks and Rec, with BLM, with our community councils, and basically everybody that's a stakeholder and a landowner to try and get ahead of where we can implement mitigation efforts. We're currently, you can click to the next slide as I'm talking. Thank you. We're currently, this is the one that I've identified as the most vulnerable and highest risk. And we're at a point where we're at an invitation to bid that's been, that will be submitted to the municipality itself. I'm putting the final touches on it right now with our department. But we've passed a resolution of support with the Basher Community Council on this. We've spoken with the Federation of Community Councils. We've engaged with all of the players, Far North Bicentennial User Group, but we're, as this office pushes its first major initiative through, we're trying to make for sure that we check every box and message this the right way, so we don't have any backlash on the back end of it. But we've had super positive feedback all the way through. But this is a unique opportunity for us with the municipality because the MOA owns both sides of that road. So we have to engage with ourselves to get permission, and then also with all of our user groups and our residents. But it provides a unique opportunity that other lines don't. You can go to the next slide, please.
Before you move on, I have a couple of folks with questions, but one was ready to wait until the end. Karen, your thoughts? You can go now or at the end.
It was related to the Stuckagon Heights. There was some comment at Scenic Foothills Community Council that they're in support of the clearing and what you're going to do, but they were surprised that the homeowners themselves didn't have to do the same clearing. Once Campbell Airstrip Road turns into Basher, it's my understanding that that's not going to have the 100-foot buffer. The homeowners don't have to clear the trees. And so it seemed interesting that the park is doing it, but the homeowners themselves don't have to do it. Do I understand that correctly?
So we're Through the chair, if I may answer this. Okay.
You
and
have the floor.
I'm happy to answer this at the end as well if it's more appropriate, but I'll defer to your judgment on it. I do have opportunities for.
Yeah, so,
Okay, you can wait.
yeah, let's go ahead and wait. I have a queue, so we'll make sure we do that. I'll note for the record, it's 10:08 and Mr. Rivera has joined us. Go ahead.
Okay. And I'll touch on some of those points as well as we progress through and some of the challenges. So I believe you guys are familiar with the Halo dollars that were passed, and we are the custodians of that funding source. I've been working directly with President Kaylee Nolan to provide alignment for their requested mitigation efforts and then just kind of scope them and shape them so they meet with the overall municipal efforts and some of the strategies that we're looking to execute. So with that, we're going to execute Halo dollars to provide a fuel break in Ruth Arcayan Park. One of the vulnerabilities there is Hanshu Middle School is one of the only schools within our municipality that has fuel that's directly adjacent to the building there and fairly, it's black spruce, so it's fairly receptive fuel. So one of the project initiatives is coming off of the driving range and then tying it into Spring Hill Elementary up there to the north and providing a break to bisect that loading that's in there. Forsyth Park was treated back in '08. It's actually part of that treatment as well, but there's a ton of dead and down that is back in that area, and we're looking at using some of those dollars to retreat that area and clean up the forest floor in there. And then as well as Clark's Road and Heights Hill, that was executed in 2002, 2003, and then a bit in '06, and that has significant growth in there and a single access road as well. Next slide. And then part of this too is what we don't want to be in a position is just throwing mitigation efforts at the municipality without any rhyme or reason. So we're working directly with BLM, obviously with Halo that I just mentioned to you, and then with our all of our landowners and cooperators to provide strategic mitigation efforts. So the line that you see on the left-hand side that's just east of Sahali subdivision, where it looks like it just goes into the abyss there, it actually ties in with the BLM mitigation line that they have pre-planned. So we're working directly with Jared with BLM to have our lines intersect with theirs to have the most robust possible fire breaks that are out here within our community. And then two other proposed lines that we're soliciting GNA funding. So Good Neighbor Authority with the BLM is a line coming off of Hilltop Ski Area, providing a fire break that's wide enough that we can potentially access with apparatus, Hilltop to Basher, and then along from Abbott, where it turns into Hillside Drive up to Prospect Heights, and then from Prospect Heights south to provide a buffer. This is a fire-prone area, as you guys know what's happened to the west of there, but also in 1974, we had the Hanshu fire, which was 77 acres just on the north side of Abbott Road. And then in 73, a 253 acre that's actually positioned straight in the subdivision between those bisecting lines on the east side. Next slide, please.
A quick question.
Quick question on that last slide. As I look towards the lower right corner and where the yellow lines are for the brakes, I mean, it looks like that probably in a lot of areas tracks pretty closely with where the edge of the state park is.
Correct. So state park land on the right-hand side, and some of that is actually, I believe, intermixed with some DOF land further south. And then on the north side, still MOA land in that geography.
So where it runs along the edge of the park, is that there also because it is the place where it practically makes the most sense to put the brake, or is it there because it's easier to do it on our side of the fence?
So this touches on Ms. Branga's point too. So one of the largest challenges that we face in implementing mitigation strategies is having to coordinate individual property owners to get buy-in. Every third house, we have somebody that's unwilling to cut any of their trees or clean up their yard in any way, shape, or form. I understand and respect people's need for privacy, But where we have opportunities to engage on municipal owned land or agency owned land, I think we have a duty to take advantage of that and provide, mitigation implementation that will protect those homes within those communities. And this geography provides us that opportunity where we have single ownership with, municipality or state parks. And then we're soliciting a BLM grant source. So those entities don't actually have to pay for it. We're providing a funding source to execute the mitigation on that land. Does that answer? Thank you.
Go ahead.
Next slide, please. So with all of these grants that we're working with, and then the different colors of money that we get, whether it's Halo dollars or funding from State of Alaska Division of Forestry or the U.S. Forest Service grant, we have to shape some of the projects. So where we're prioritizing egress and or large projects, we also have different colors of money for opportunities within actual parks or stuff that's directly against infrastructure. And so one of the projects that we've identified is this was a part of this was treated in 2002 to 2004, but a retreatment along a fairly vulnerable area. There's enough fuel to create problems. Obviously, that's where we've had 4 fires over the past 20 years. But we're looking at executing different colors of money for different styles of projects, if that makes sense. Next slide. Okay, so Ms. Braga, this will speak to a little bit of your question, but Eagle River Valley, single egress along Highland and also Eagle River Road itself. The land ownership along that corridor, if we were going to focus our efforts to provide a break on the south side of Eagle River Road and north end of Highland Road, where we have vulnerability. We had a 25-acre fire in 2016 right in that lower end, and there's a ton of trail use down there. So we have a fair amount of human activity that generally will lend itself to opportunities for ignitions. Trying to connect all of those land ownership dots to provide an effective fuel treatment is challenging. There's a lot of land in the Eagle River Valley that's owned by Aklutna, and where we don't have anything cemented yet. We have meetings scheduled with them this week and next, where we're going to discuss being able to get permission to do fuels treatments on their lands, and then a lot of the perimeter ownership to those subdivisions is MOA land. So we have the opportunity to, have success right tight next to those subdivisions. So to your point, some of the challenges that I've faced in my 25 years of executing project work and mitigation work on the hillside is coordinating individual ownership. So where we have the opportunity to just coordinate with a singular entity that owns big tracts of land that still provides a fuel break tight to the values at risk, we're going to execute there. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the far north end perimeter of Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. Just to the left of that yellow line are live fire ranges that they train on, and that, I guess for context, the previous 6 years that before I came here to the Anchorage Fire Department, I was the fire management officer for the Air Force and Space Force lands here. So we have a fair amount of unplanned ignitions just to the west of that line. The ranges that they're actively shooting live fire munitions on are less than 2 miles away from the closest home. So very close in proximity. There are no existing fuel breaks, and it's about a 25-minute response time for JBEAR Fire and Emergency Services to actually get to those locations in the event that there's an incident. So with that, we have opportunities with DoD for REPI funding, where they actually will provide a funding source to execute a fuel mitigation project, and we're coordinating with them. We have not been awarded those funds. We are actively applying for those funds. And I say all of this to show that we are working with every landowner and every possible partner to solicit dollars and opportunities to protect this municipality. Next slide.
Before you move on there, quick question on that. You said we are applying for funds. This is JBEAR land. We are applying for funds for JBEAR mitigation.
We are applying funds that JBER will provide for mitigation efforts to be executed on municipal-owned land and or municipality land, where we have Eklutna Tribe is who owns that partnership, and then also Birch Lake Bible Camp are the predominant landowners.
Birchwood on the other side. So, oh,
Beach Lake
Beach
Park,
Lake.
thank you.
Okay, so the line there then to the right of it is Eklutna land?
On the south end of that line, that's Eklutna land, and then you go up to the lakes, it transitions into
Okay, so
and
it's
as
not.
well as the Bible Camp ownership.
Yeah, so that to the right is not J Bear and.
Correct.
So the line would go on the side outside of the fence effectively on.
Yes, sir.
On non-military land. Okay, thank you.
No problem. Next, yep, thank you. So with the fires in LA, with respect to the tragedy that they're facing, one of the significant challenges that was highlighted was water and hydrant availability and hydrant use. I don't have all of the answers at this moment. I can be honest and forthright with that, but I have a strategic meeting scheduled for tomorrow with AWWU to run scenarios based on what we can and cannot provide as a service. What we do know is that we don't have hydrants from mid-hillside up to upper hillside. Where we have an advantage over what they're facing in LA is we have a lot of natural water sources on Anchorage Hillside. We have a fair amount of lakes, we have creeks, we have fill sites identified. We're continuing to identify more of those and what our capabilities are, as well as getting adapted equipment for the department to be able to better utilize those sources. So this is something that is known and is something that we're working diligently with the AWWU on. Next slide. Okay, so solutions, we're actively engaged in a number of different initiatives. We're revisiting our own policies within the department to see if we can make modifications to enable the homeowner to be more proactive and lessen some of the restrictions in a safe and practical way. We've engaged with this office with all of our land agency and suppression partners. We're continuing to meet with them now more than ever because of different projects that we've actually established. And I'll get into those in a minute. But we have more coordination than ever before. And a part of that is due to the, the tragedies that we're seeing on the news, but also just because through the years, we've been able to build pretty strong relationships with all of these folks. So we're actively engaged in shooting holes through our own systems and making for sure we're as strong as possible in our response capacity. Next slide. Okay, one of those initiatives that we're working on right now is the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. The last update was in 2008. We actually have our contractors here in the room that are facilitating this effort for us. But what it is a preparedness plan for the municipality. They do an assessment and look at our vulnerabilities within our communities and what our opportunities are to engage in mitigation efforts. And they prioritize those for us. One of the unique things about a CWPP is it's a requirement for a lot of the grant funding that we are soliciting. Fortunately, because we're engaged in it, it's not a detraction from being able to solicit those funds. But we are actively engaged in it. We're shooting for Q1 of 26 for that document to be published. Next slide.
Question for you on that. You said Q1 26 for publishing. By publishing, do you mean finally in its final form or published in draft to go through a public process?
Final form.
Okay, thank you.
So what we've executed so far, hired the division chief. We have Ms. Dufek with us as well as our project manager. We currently have another position that's ready to go through HR as well. And then alignment really is the biggest thing. We've executed different grants. We've through the $4 million grant that we have, we were able to provide adequate equipment for the entirety of our line operations personnel for all things related to wildfire. purchased more equipment through different funding. We were able to secure 2 new engines, brush engines that will be delivered spring of 25 this year. So a lot of effort has gone into this in the past 2 years, and before that as well. But we've really been ramping up the program as a whole within the department. Next slide.
Quick comment on the previous slide. I think it would benefit the community for the department's communications team to put out some kind of communication along the lines of the things we've been doing over the last 2 years, so that the public can hear that this is going on. This, to me, is the most concrete, specific communication. Thank you.
Yes, Chair Constant, thank you for that. Those of us in the room and the viewers and listeners would be pleased to know that we're in the process of hiring a new PIO. We're between PIOs right now, and this is top of mind for the new PIO whenever that person comes on board.
Okay, and I mean, I would be willing to throw my communications team under the bus and offer them to support a communication around this if you find you have kind of orderly information. So we'll talk about that later. This is a timely question, one that's kind of better to get out before a hiring process and everything.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Chair Constance, this is a perfect lead-in, and I appreciate that. So our community outreach that we have currently engaged in, we've been solicited to attend multiple community council meetings, and HIRA, as well as the Resiliency Committee, and then also HALO. And then with the CWPP process, we have conducted our second stakeholder meeting. That was day before yesterday, where we have all of the players that are involved in this process, power, water, everyone, all of our land management agencies as well. And then in addition to that, through Q2 of 25, the intent for this office is to engage in town halls with our community councils, and then provide just a singular forum to piggyback off of all of our open houses that our agencies have as initiatives for spring fire, but dedicated town halls for community outreach with the CWPP and wildfire awareness. Next slide. Okay. We're engaging in amplifying the training, specialty training for the department right now. We have fallen in alignment with the National Wildland Fire Coordination Group standards, and we're working directly with Division of Forestry to ensure that the training that we're providing is most advantageous for the department, as well as our mutual aid partners. And what I mean by that is we're looking for every opportunity to be fiscally responsible with our training. And there's bridge gaps, bridge classes that we can provide because we have highly trained firefighters within the department, and we can modify the wildland training to support those. And we're actively engaged in that right now. Next slide. Okay. This office and its ability to sustain and continue on is reliant on grant funding right now. That's a challenge that we've seen throughout the past 25 years that I've been involved with this, where we unfortunately will have gaps. These grants that we're soliciting carry on past the current grant that funds the office and the supervision for it and execution of these. What we've seen over the past 25 years is an increase in fire probability, and what we're projecting for the next 25 years is 169% increase in that in that vulnerability as well. So these treatments, once they're completed, they require retreatment, they require maintenance, and we just, as a whole, need to, I think, put some energy into ensuring that we have the ability to maintain this program past the Forest Service grant that we're currently working under. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that anybody may have.
All right, we'll start with Ms. Brawley.
Thanks. I have a bunch of questions, so I'm going to ask a couple and then I'll come back around because they're on different topics. One, I want to respond to the characterization of, because I know you keep saying it, a lot of folks keep saying it, hillside. I understand what that means. That is also one part of town. It is one of the most effective parts of town, but I appreciate you highlighting the Jay Bear Land, the Basher, we talked about Eagle River and Girdwood, because what I'm concerned about is that when folks go to the legislature or we have well-meaning legislators that represent one area of town, they write funding for one area of town, and then we end up in the situation that the city has where some things are very well funded and other things languish. And so this is a preface to my question, sorry. So in our legislative program and our CIB now, we have an ask for funding for the urban wild interface, and it is not specific to Hillside. And that is not to cast aspersion on Halo or any of the groups, because it makes sense that they're advocating for their area. But we need to think more broadly than that. So I appreciate that you're laying out really the whole scale of risk. So my question is really, can you also elaborate more on the scope of the threat for other parts of town? Because obviously I live probably as far as possible from all of these areas. But also we need to communicate to our community that this is an issue for everybody, whether my house is at risk of burning or not, right? So could you maybe elaborate on kind of what risks you see down off the hillside, right, for the rest of town, and really what that looks like beyond kind of the up on the hillside area?
Yes, thank you, Member Brawley. Your observations and your concern are very well placed, and we're very concerned as well about the entirety of the municipality along the Chugach range. When I say that the Anchorage hillside represents the largest single threat to the municipality, it's not because when I say that the risk is the largest risk facing our municipality, it's not because the threat is any greater there. The threat is the same in Girdwood and Chugach and Eagle River Valley and on and on. The risk is higher just because of the value of the built infrastructure there. And so that's the basis for my comments. And then I think beyond that, John is better equipped to answer the other aspects of this.
To piggyback off of that, and thank you for the question as well. Populace also plays a role in that too. Obviously, we have more opportunities for ignition where we have higher congestion. But with that said, I'm very aware of like the vulnerabilities of Eklutna Valley. I was part of that response in 2010 to that fire that was substantial back there. We have, due to time constraints, I wasn't able to speak to projected mitigation efforts within Eklutna Valley too. But we have them everywhere within the municipality. We've identified a need, and we have plans that are in the works and efforts that are going into, as we have dollars that are able to execute in those initiatives, then we are pursuing that. From a strategic point of view, what we know is the data that we have and the experiences that we have. And we've had fires in Eklutna, and we've had fires along Turnagain Arm. But we consistently have fires routinely every single summer within a known geography in MLK and Elmore. And so I try and be as proactive and as intelligent to chase the source as quickly as I can, or the highest probability, and work our way out. Any and all at-risk subdivisions, communities, and egress routes are on the table, and we intend to pursue.
Thanks. And then second question, then I'll see the floor. You mentioned the state and really the challenge of who owns the land. And that's another thing where, again, as we're thinking about advocating to the state, reminding them they are one of the biggest landowners in the municipality, right, with the state park and other pieces. So how are you guys already coordinating with Chugach State Park? You mentioned BLM and all those other ones, but maybe just, because it is such a big chunk of land, and I think Zach and I were talking about how it is probably where a fire is going to start, is in that park. And so how can we better partner with them, or what do you need to partner with them?
So this is a really good question. One of the significant challenges with putting mitigation lines in a geography is, are they on the right side of where the ignition is? I can't tell you how many lines I have put in the woods throughout my career where we had a fire on the wrong side of it. State of Alaska Division of Forestry, or State of Alaska as a whole, actually, a lot of their geography that they own is quite a ways off of residential. One of the challenges with the response in Alaska to wildland fire is we have a limited number of resources, and then we have to call to the lower 48 to be able to get support. So with that in mind, it is critically important that we put our mitigation lines as close to the accessible areas as possible, road accessibility, firefighter accessibility, and not putting them, further out in a way. And unfortunately, a lot of the state land is further away and off the road system. A decent example of that, and to just provide perspective, is one of the mitigation projects that was completed in 2010 was on the south side of Stuckagon Heights. A lot of people don't even know that exists because it's off of the trail system. It's challenging to get to, and unless you know the flagged route to get to it, you don't know it's there. So how is, if we have a fire in 10 years from now where we have turnover within the Division of Forestry and turnover within the department, how do we know those lines are there, and how do we even get there, right? And then can we get apparatus there? So we're trying to be strategic in where we're placing these things, and prioritizing on access and egress, access for firefighters, egress for the public, and then where we can actually have a strong opportunistic operational line that we can do something with it.
Right, Karen. You got the answer you needed?
Yes.
All right. I had you, but I think you got your answer.
Mhm.
So I have a couple questions, no one else in the queue, so I'll jump in. And some of this might also be the 8th floor. But first, a couple of questions that I think are squarely within the fire service. So you said that the office is reliant on grant funding until 2027 and it's gone. How much is the grant? What are we talking about in terms of actual expense?
We're talking about the USDA, the $4 million.
Yeah, it's the money that's actually supporting the office of this fire prevention stuff.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So this is actually congressionally directed spending that was secured by Senator Murkowski and is being managed through the USDA. So we're treating it like a grant, but it's actually just an appropriation to us. We're 2 years into that. It took a long time to get the program staffed up as it currently is with these 2 people. But it's not as if we did nothing in the interim. We, as Chief Clever just pointed out, we purchased some equipment, we provided some training and things like that. And we've done some mitigation work. We've funded some mitigation work. The money will expire in, we have a lot of work to do in the next 2 years. We basically have, you could say 4 years of work to do in 2 years. You can also say that we have 16 or 17 years of work to do because virtually nothing has been done. I don't want to say virtually nothing. That's, I want to use a softer word there. Little meaningful work had been done through the latter part of the 2010s and the teens. And so we have a lot of catching up to do. As you've already heard, many of the fuel treatments and the fire breaks that have been done a couple of decades ago have grown in and need to be repeated. And so we're very concerned about the sustainability of this function. And once the money runs out, if we discontinue at that time, then in just a few years, we'll be right back where we are now. And so I think it's imperative that we acknowledge the long-term future of wildland fire risk as a major risk to our community, and that we staff this in the long term.
Yeah, so the last phrase you just used helps me get to the point that I'm trying to strike to. So I visualize, even though the source is one, that you have 2 functions here. One is a staffing function, and then everything else like project functions that are specific efforts funded by this grant or other efforts that are ongoing. And so I guess what I want to boil down to, and you don't need to answer this off the top of your head, is separate from kind of the actual outputs. What is the cost of making sure this office continues as an office, and then we can talk through your strategic planning process about the actual kind of annualization of efforts of projects, if you will, a way to kind of see it in two parts. So labor and all the work. So just, you don't need to answer today, but I want help understanding what would it cost if we didn't have millions of dollars today to staff this office and then be entrepreneurial about finding money for projects.
Okay, yep, very good, thank you.
Okay,
Noted.
so that's the first. Second was, and I kind of just tipped into it, is I think that it's a valuable process to engage the assembly in your strategic planning process. Obviously, it's your strategic plan, but we're the interface more broadly to all of those efforts. And the more you bring us along, the easier it's going to be for all of us to fund it. And so that, and then I think this is the eighth floor question. Bill has been kind of wrestling with this a little bit. We passed a bond process that allows for life safety bonds that are muni-wide payers, but they tackle specific projects for life safety. And so, there was an intervening dark age of the pandemic and everything else that happened where we lost kind of the traction on that funding source, but it just seems to be red meat for that category of funding. And so I'm hopeful that the administration in their OEM process and their other elements that they're looking at as a broader strategic conversation are looking at life safety bonds to tackle some of these big picture issues with local. So, okay, other members, anyone else? Anna?
Yeah, I think I want to raise these kind of longer term, and I think this is something we come back to in a future work session because it's maybe outside of your scope. It strikes me what you said that, we can't, basically we have to ask property owners to do what helps everybody. And that strikes me as such the classic Alaska thing where we are extremely vulnerable, interdependent, and, we're this little island of folks. And if one thing happens, we're all affected. And also, do not tell anybody what to do, right? Like that is the challenge that we have culturally, I think, here, and even in Anchorage. And so where I'm going is, I wonder, one, are there ways to lean more heavily on property owners, or are we at the point that we need to compel them to do things? And again, I'm not asking because AFD is going to go out and do that, but I want to put that on the table to think about, because this is a serious problem. And then the other thing is, longer term, we're talking about housing. We're talking about where we should have more housing. I think there's a lot of recognition that most of that housing needs to be in the urban core, where there's services, all of those things. Are we also at the point that we more heavily regulate any structure that goes up on that hillside? So not more dense housing, I'm saying any housing. So one way to do that, for example, is everything built up there requires a conditional use. And I'm not arguing that that's the right answer, but I think those are the questions we have to start asking ourselves and really questioning what is the balance between protecting individual property rights and the fact that we're all vulnerable. So again, I want to raise that, knowing that AFD is not the right agency to lean in on that, because you guys have to respond to whatever happens on the other end. But I do want to start raising that conversation. So I'm just curious to your thoughts on that.
Ms. Brawley, to your comment and your question, thank you for it. Unfortunately, this is not just an Alaska problem. With my involvement with large fire management across the West, it's an everywhere problem, and people are resistant to any kind of change, and they're resistant to any kind of modification on their property. And even in an adverse situation like you're seeing in LA right now, we do not have eminent domain. We don't have the ability to engage like that. Other countries do, Australia, stuff like that, but we do not. So we are forced into a process of having to put our mitigation lines or our fire breaks on real incidents in the places that we are able to. And unfortunately, they're not always the most optimal, but that's what we're faced with. And on the preparedness and mitigation side of that, we are even more bound by some of those constraints. And quite honestly, I think that the challenge is when we force people to do things, we meet lots of resistance, right? And when we can be, sound custodians of this municipality and really engage them and try and find the happy medium and try and explain the most effective solution, I think we're going to gain some serious traction there. And I think just with the geography of the way the municipality is laid out, we have the opportunity to do that. Do you want to add anything?
Sure, I'm not really equipped to answer the code question, but I will raise that with Chief Dean and the state, and we can provide an answer.
Thanks. And I just want to recognize that that's definitely outside of your purview, but I'm raising that because as we continue this conversation, I think those are the questions we have to wrestle with. Thanks.
Yeah, and there would be nothing like hundreds or thousands of acres of newly cleared land, cleared in an immediate and overnight kind of manner to motivate people to finally figure out how to clear what remains. And that is a nightmare situation. Anyone else? So we have just a couple more minutes. Chief, you want to kind of close us out?
Yes, thank you. Again, I'm grateful for the opportunity to sit before you and talk about what we view as the risk facing our community and what we're doing about it. This is a whole community problem. It's not just the fire department. And just to acknowledge your opening remarks, Chair Constant, the OEM has been very supportive. They have a large role in this. Parks and Rec has a large role in this, and my colleagues here are in the gallery, ready to take any questions if there were any. And above that, it's probably the biggest stakeholder we have are the homeowners and residents that we're going to rely on to help make our community safer. So our grant, the $4 million grant, along with some of the other funding sources that we have been using, there's plenty of opportunities for the public to be involved. It includes doing an aggressive public education campaign. You've heard about some of the ingress and egress routes. We need the community support for those things. The fuel treatments and mitigation efforts. We need the residents, homeowners, and the public to understand the risk and go along with those efforts. So again, thank you. And of course, we're always ready to take additional questions.
So I will also conclude by saying that the administration has some additional information that they would like to brief the assembly on. And so we will likely do a work session that includes OEM, the mayor's office, the manager's office, and whomever they would like to kind of fold into this conversation so that we also hear from the kind of political layer and what direction the intent is to go there. So with that, I think that if there are no further questions, we'll go ahead and adjourn. There's a committee meeting that starts in about 15 minutes. Thank you, everybody.